So many of us throughout the country and the world have the experience of being a young person, maybe, or as a young adult, or at some point in our adulthood, we decide to approach a faith tradition of some sort. You engage in a church, in a home group, in a church or a home church, they call it, and you begin to learn about really important things. Maybe it's Judaism, maybe it's Jewish traditions, Christian faith traditions of all sorts. And it is a wonderful thing. You know, whether you have a faith belief or not, I'm hoping that you can tune into this show because the topic that we're going to talk about is not quite that, but something, well, maybe I'll say a far cry different from that. And a topic that I've been wanting to cover for so long. And it's taken me this long to actually get a person that I feel like knows a little bit about this topic. Kind of another one that I don't know a whole lot about, but we are going to be talking about cults, cult faith practices, what it is, all about it. And we've got an amazing person here that's got an awesome story that I only know the tidbits of, and I'm wildly interested to hear what she went through, how she progressed through this. And so we do have another guest tonight that is going to be recording with us, Miss Vonne Earl. So I am Chris Gazdick. He is Craig Graves. I'm a mental health and substance abuse therapist. I have a book coming out soon, available in paperback in March. Right now in Kindle version, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. Craig, you are an unbeatable life coach. Unbeatable mind life coach. Did I spit that out?
Yeah, that's good enough.
That's good enough. Wininyourmind.com is where you can find him. He'd love to help you out with coaching needs anywhere throughout the world. He is international capable. So see the world through the lens of a therapist and a coach, being aware that it's not delivery of therapy services in any way. Check out throughatherapisteyes.com, where we are sponsored by BetterHelp. Click the counseling tab there. Lots of things that Mr. Neil Robinson, our awesome producer, has been knocking out. I'd like to say, Craig, let's figure this thing out together. The human emotional experience. You down with that tonight on this crazy topic?
Sounds like fun to me, man. Let's do it.
All right. So we do have, as I said, man, we have Miss Vonne Earl that is with us. And she is, in way of a little bit of an introduction, she has been the director of a nonprofit ministry, YKI Coaching. And as a coach herself, she specializes in emotional wellness and understands the patterns, dynamics, and destructive causes by cults, as herself was once part of the Mormon cult for 20 years. Mormon cult, Craig, have you heard that phrase?
I haven't. I can't wait to talk about that.
Kind of a big statement. Kind of a big statement. She has been what she terms free in Christ for 16 years and is the author of the book Loved into the Light, Shining God's Light on Mormonism. It is her desire to see everyone live their fullest potential found in the freedom of having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as Savior. So, Miss Earl, welcome to Through a Therapist's Eyes. That is the introduction. Did I miss anything? How'd I do there?
No, that was awesome. And thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this time together.
I'm debating whether or not you could even be near as excited as I am to have this conversation. So you do, and just a little bit about you, I guess, sort of, who you are and what makes you you. You do coaching with YKI Coaching. I was actually curious what YKI stands for.
Awesome. Well, YKI stands for Your Kingdom Inheritance. We are a Christian coaching ministry. We believe that everybody has an inheritance from the Lord, and we want to help people receive that. But we also believe that you know it. So it stands for you know it. We don't advise. We help empower our clients, and we help them to renew their mind so they can live their best life.
Okay, cool. So being all far out west, you do know who the Pittsburgh Steelers are, right?
I'm not much into sports, but I have. Don't pin me on sports.
Oh dear.
Emotional wellness.
Emotional wellness.
I'm one of those girls.
Well, I've often thought that, honestly, like I think of out west and getting to do some of the things that I'm doing now, it kind of seems like a whole nother world over there to me. It seems so cool. Like I've actually begun to develop some sort of weird passion. Like I feel like I want to live in the Rocky Mountains, man. Like it's cool over there. And I actually have a guy in high school that he took a business trip out there and he literally never came back. What do you like to do over there? What makes you you?
Orange County, California. This is where I'm at. And so it's beautiful. I love the beach. We go walking, love to be outdoors, my favorite place to be. And since we are all have to eat outside, it's perfect, just bundle up because you're outdoors for dining right now during COVID. But it is very beautiful. We do go for walks and things. We had a horrible storm recently here, though. Is pretty intense for California with the winds, but it's pretty nice weather usually all year round.
I saw that rolling through, and I was worried about that because the news reports were kind of like, this horrible all red line was coming off of the ocean and was supposed to rain down on all of those lands that had the wildfires, and they're worried about mudslides and
Right.
just, did it work out okay?
Yeah, I think they're not so concerned right now with the mudslides, but we still had that forecasted in the news. It's more areas of LA and stuff, but the fires are our scariest thing. People think it's earthquakes, but it's the fires. We live on close to a canyon. So we one time had a fire so close to our house. We saw the flames. It was like, oh, get that thing out. So we know what it's like.
Oh my God, that sounds terrifying.
Very.
Craig, what's one of the coolest things about living out west that I think I would like to experience?
I don't know what you'd like to experience. I can think of several that I'd like to experience, but go ahead.
No insects. Is that true?
Oh, stop. They're still here. We still have insects, mosquitoes. Yes, we still have them. Those little June bugs.
Really? So I was told that that's part of the coolness is that people just don't even have screens and stuff like that.
Oh, that's true. We don't have screens. We don't use screens here at our house. We have the ocean breeze coming in and we don't use screens, but there's still that occasional mosquito.
Oh, she blew my myth apart. I guess it's a myth, Craig.
Vonne, Orange County, that's near LA, right? Los Angeles area?
We're an hour south of LA.
Okay.
So before I forget, how can people contact you for coaching? And if they want to reach out to you as they figure out how knowledgeable you are about all of this stuff, I know that you have ykcoaching.com. You have some resources books out there. You've got a whole team of coaches that work with you. Tell us a little bit about, kind of what you offer. I know it's not a promotion thing, but I like to make sure people know how to reach people we're talking to.
Well, thank you. So ykcoaching.com is where we can be found. We do train and equip Christians to coach. We definitely vet and screen and work with our coaches until they're ready to launch. We're a 5-star ministry. We have 6 coaches on our team that are all fully equipped to work in the methods that we use to help one to renew their mind so they can live a successful life, because everything is all about the mind. The only thing that makes any difference between one individual and the next is the way that they're thinking. And so we want to help people to program their minds and get their minds right so that they can live a successful, healthy life.
And how long you been doing the coaching stuff?
10 years.
10 years, huh?
Yeah. We've
wow, that's awesome.
For 5. So working and helping other people to adapt and come to know our methods for the last 5 years. We have psychologists, people that have, great experience, and still we want them to know our methods because our methods work. They're awesome.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll tell you, listening audience, and for you, Vonne, what I kind of want to do today is spend a little bit of time and kind of get the story. I think I had talked to you on the phone before, and before the mics come on, and you're kind of willing to share some of the things that you personally went through, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and man, I mean, such an amazing story that I know of a little bit already. And I really would. I know it's old. I didn't realize that, by the way. The book that we're highlighting was actually written in 2012, and I honestly didn't look at the copyright. But it's been out for a little bit while. But the book is really, well, your story really, all told, is just one that I think people experience way more than we realize with cult events, cult organizations. And I also feel like there's a lot of confusion out there about, kind of what they are and how they look, how they operate. And I want to give a sense after we get some time to kind of walk through what happened with you, if you're still willing to do that, and then talk about, on the other side of that, how do we manage it? How do people that find themselves possibly in this, like it's a trapped kind of world, I would imagine. I mean, really, really talk about feeling alone. When you start to question kind of what's going on around you, I can imagine people just being terribly stuck and scared in a way that it's hard to put words on, you know? So that's what we're in for.
Awesome. Well, gosh, how I can just begin and you tell me how much time you want to go and just interrupt me as you need, because I can talk about this all day. It's absolutely fascinating to me. And so I guess I'll start with the fact of when I left, and then I'll back up and tell you how it happened. But like all stories, our stories involve other people. And so for me, I could have been a Mormon for the rest of my life, even though there were problems and things that I saw within the church. I still had it so ingrained into my mind that this was the truth and this is the way it was. But there were problems beginning to surface in my family. So my daughter began to cut herself. And so I saw one day a gash down her arm, and what happened to you, honey? What's going on? She was 15 at the time. And she said, well, I can't tell you, Mom. I have to tell you tomorrow. And I didn't know at the time that she had a Christian that was speaking to her and helping her to understand her independence, that she no longer had to be a Mormon. She didn't have to be trapped into this cult-like life for the rest of her life. I didn't know this. And so as a Mormon mom, she felt scared to tell me. And so that kind of gives you a little indication of the fact that the way our home was operating was such a way that my daughter didn't even feel safe to come and tell me. And that kind of is a little bit of an embarrassment, but you can only do what's been done to you. And so I went to pick her up after she said 24 hours. I went to pick her up the next day and I said, okay, you have to tell me what's going on. What's going on with you? And she says, Mom, I just can't be a Mormon anymore. And I said, oh, sweetheart. And thankfully I had enough sense about me to just hug her and say, we'll get through this. I do not know how or what. I'll pray about this. We'll get through this. I just know that I love you. And so I was able to reassure her, but I was left with this whole quandary of what do I do? My life is obviously not working well. My marriage has having difficulty. My sons really didn't like going to church, and my daughter's cutting herself because she doesn't want to go to church. So fruits of what was happening within Mormonism that I'll explain were showing up into my life. And so I loved Jesus. I loved him. So I would never tell a Mormon, like, you're going to hell or you don't know the Lord or anything like that, because I know who I was and I love the Lord. And so I literally went out onto the trail and prayed, and I just sought the Lord, like, what do you want me to do, Lord? Like, my family's fallen apart. My daughter's got this going on, and I made a commitment to you, and I don't know what to do. I'm so scared and I'm so lost. And I had the most spiritual encounter that cannot even be put into words. It always seems to lessen it with the words that you have to deliver it. But I was given the permission, first of all, the peace of God blanketed me like a big, warm, comforting blanket saying, you are okay. You are okay. So then the Lord really inspired me that it was going to be okay for me to leave the church, and he was going to walk this journey with me. And I literally could not have done that without the Lord's permission, because I was very dedicated to the Mormon faith. So I just want listeners to understand there wasn't anything wrong in my life. There was no sin. There was no wanting to drink alcohol or do anything contrary to the Mormon faith. All I wanted was to experience this peace that God said that I could have. And the very fruits of what was happening from Mormonism were showing up in my life. And I know this to be true for many Mormon families, that what looks very good on the outside, there's a lot of suffering going on the inside. So that being said, I came back and told my husband, like, I had this spiritual experience with the Lord. He really has made it okay for me to leave the church. How do you feel about it? And, what would you mind if all of us just went to our local community church? And then my husband said, fine. He was a third generation Mormon. I was a convert to the church. My husband was a third generation Mormon, meaning his grandmother came from Denmark over to the US with a Mormon missionary, and then had his mother and then my husband. So third generation Mormon.
That's a lot of family culture. That's a lot of tradition. That's a lot of steeped in the beliefs and whatnot, right? So that's pretty ingrained.
So he said, yes, okay, that's all right. We can go. Now, mind you, I'm very much a Mormon. So that means that I'm wearing garments, and garments are from, the top of your neck all the way down to either your knees or your ankles and your shoulder cap. So I'm wearing garments, I'm doing the full on things, but I go, okay, I'm going to go take that step and go out and go to my local church. And I'm standing there worshiping the Lord. And my daughter's so scared for me. She knows I'm this very Mormon mother. And she comes over, Mom, are you okay? Is everything okay? And I'm like, honey, I can worship God anywhere. And just saying those words spoke truth to my heart. I knew that I could worship the Lord anywhere. And so I began with just listening to the Lord and seeking him. He told me to put away all of my scriptures, the Mormon scriptures that I had, and I only read the Bible. I only read the Bible for 3 years. He told me to do this, just put everything away and only read the Bible. And I began to read it, and the layers began to come off. And I began to want to understand how somebody is so strong as me, I'm a very strong, independent person, could become brainwashed into doing this whole Mormon faith. That was fascinating to me. And that's what led me into my whole emotional wellness practice that I do, because I began to study psychology and patterns and how do people get into this? And how could somebody like me allow somebody to tell me these things? How could I follow along in that, all the way down to what I was wearing for my underwear, right? And so,
and let me make a point there, right. And I heard that. I mean, right down to undergarments. That's something you said to me on the phone, like, wow. Right. And the point that I want to make there, in recent times, we did a show about domestic violence in dating, with actually my new colleague at Metrolina. And that was one of the things we really wanted to drive home. And I think I want to do that here too, because many people, I think, that are in these circumstances absolutely carry the belief like, this doesn't happen to me. This is not here. I would never let, that happen. Nobody's going to control what undergarments I wear, for crying out loud.
right.
But the insidious nature of cult organizations, you don't know what's happening, and it can happen largely, I would make the statement, to anyone. Does that sound fair?
No, I 100% agree. And in my book, I use the analogy that it's like boiling a frog. Like you put it in the water, then the heat goes up. It doesn't really know it's getting boiled until it is. I didn't know that I had all this bondage on me until I began to really exhibit some really drastic fruits, like my daughter cutting herself and my marriage falling apart and things like that happening in my life. So after I began this real study of psychology and how the mind works and how little by little you do become brainwashed, it led me into really seeking to understand Mormon faith. And so then began my study after 3 years of just in the Bible to go counter and search everything out against the Mormon church. And that was terrifying to me because, and when I say the word terrifying, I'm really very literal in that this was the most scary thing I've ever done in my life, was leave the Mormon church, because all along it had been ingrained into me that I would be apostatizing and that I would go to hell. And so since I had such a love for the Lord, and since I wanted to go to heaven with the Lord and be with the Lord in eternity, the very fact that someone had ingrained that into my mind, that by leaving the Mormon faith, it was no longer going to be an opportunity for me. And so that scared me very much. And so it scared me for my family. And so you can see how it was so important for me to just begin to just read the Bible, then to begin to understand what was happening counter with the Mormon faith and what actually is wrong with the Mormon faith, and why I use the terms that it is a cult. And I firmly believe that. And I'm very saddened by anybody that is still a part of the Mormon faith. Now I drive by the temple, and it greatly saddens me to think that all of this money and all of this time and waste of energy is put into a building destroying lives.
Yeah, wow. Mm-hmm. One of the things I hear there, Craig, you have a thought? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. If I missed this, I apologize, but how do we define a cult? What is a cult?
Yeah, I want to go there. Can we put a pause on that just a little bit to get her story, because that is a primary point of what we really need to understand from today.
Awesome.
Okay.
Definitely.
I hate doing that. Yeah, my close buddy tells me, like, dude, don't do that. I definitely want to get there. And I think that what I'm hearing, though, that I want to highlight there is the fear. Like, is that a big component? The living in fear.
Oh, it's so much. It's so much of component. And I think that for us, I want to take us now into understanding, since I began to understand the patterns and how I adapted into the Mormon faith. And I said, wow, let me study this out. Let me figure this out. Now I want to just kind of back up and help you understand how I even got into the Mormon faith in the first place. And I know that there are several different Mormons. There are culture bred Mormons, which is my husband. He's a third generation Mormon. There are just people that are Mormons and they very much believe it. My husband just kind of was culture. And culture
You
just
said culture bred Mormons? Yeah.
I use the term culture bred, meaning you are born
Yeah.
into it. You don't really care. It's just something that you've
It
done all of
is.
your life, and it's something of who you are. And there are people that like that of all different denominations, all different faiths. They're just culture bred. They're bred into it, and they kind of just go along with it. They never really make a decision. And then there's those that are born into the Mormon faith, and they really, really believe everything that they are practicing. And then there are people like me who are converts to the religion, who really embrace it, and they fully embrace the Mormon faith. But what's the problem is that when you are becoming a Mormon, they don't tell you everything that a Mormon faith entails. So they don't tell you all these things. So I was born into a very dysfunctional home. A lot of patterns were there on things like control. My mom controlled me a lot. She really dictated my clothing, the things I would wear, as far as like not braiding your hair, getting in trouble for eating certain foods. So a little bit of a obviously dysfunction and not a healthy family. And so it's interesting to me that I would adapt to a faith that was very much the same, a controlling faith, one that would dictate for me. And that's where I'm going to get into what cults are. One that would dictate to me what I would wear. One would dictate what would I eat and drink and all these different things, all the way down to what underwear I would be wearing. So some of the things I would in my book and along with that make up a cult is that, first of all, there's a very zealous commitment to the leader, the founder of the faith. So Joseph Smith being the founder of the Mormon faith, and Joseph Smith himself says, no other person besides Jesus Christ has done greater things than me. And so he puts out this grandiose thing on himself, and all of the followers have to adhere to the prophet and what the prophet is saying. So it first started with Joseph Smith, and then it went on into all the prophets that they have now. I don't even know who the prophet is.
Talking about just the Mormon reality?
The Mormon reality of a cult.
Okay.
But for them,
okay. Well, let me jump in here and set this up a little bit, and
okay.
maybe we can weave in some of the things that you experience that, as we talk about, the topic of cults and what they are and stuff, because I'm really curious, about, a little bit more on how you got into it and what you experienced as you started to learn about it, and the controlling mechanisms that were there. But I think at this point you started to broaden it out a little bit there too, like the question, what is a cult? So let me just ask you, Craig, like kind of cold. I mean, I like to catch Craig. He just comes from a non-psychological perspective from counseling or things like that. But dude, by the way, we're not going to be able to say that much anymore because you're like launching in. Like, I think you've learned so much, and I don't know that I can really say that anymore as far as, the professional side of the counseling and psychology field. Like, you're pretty much there now, aren't you? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I don't know, man. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't. He's being humble, Vonne. I mean, he's an unbelievable coach himself and stuff. And I just caught myself, Craig, as I was saying that. So, but anyway, we caught him. He started this show, and I'm curious from just a secular and regular perspective, like what do you think a cult is?
Well, I looked it up I just wanted to hear what your and Levon's definition of it is, but it seems to be a group with, I don't remember the term, but bizarre religious beliefs. At least that's what I gathered from just a few minutes ago when I looked it up online here.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. Before I kind of looked up a formal definition, and I'm curious what you think about this thought, Levonne, in the way that I've kind of always thought about it as being, a religious practice that has a level of control over a person's life, with the primary component of the church leader or the leaders being like basically in charge of your decisions and or behavior. right? So because it's a pretty broad topic. I mean, we live in, quote unquote, the Bible Belt. And there are a lot of, a Baptist faith tradition is just that. There are what, hundreds or thousands of different denominations of Christianity and whatnot. And, Baptist is one of the many well-accepted religious faith traditions. But boy, I'll tell you, there's some pretty dangerous cult organizations that even carry maybe even under that name that you would just never know that you're in it, because it says Baptist or Southern Baptist or, other different faith traditions, but it ends up having these characteristics that are scary, terrifyingly dangerous. Does that make sense?
Oh, I so agree. When you look at like Scientology and things like that,
Yeah.
they really get involved in your life and what you're doing. One of the examples like that from a story of a leader really getting involved in our life is that we allowed our daughter to get the ear piercing up at the top of her ear. She was a young teenage girl and wanted to get the little ear piercing. It wasn't a big deal.
Oh my goodness.
So the bishop had her come into the office and privately without me, and I would never allow that now. I would never allow that. But at that time, I was very ingrained into it. And I allowed her to go into his office, and she was in there for a really long time. And I'm waiting outside of the office, and I'm just thinking like, wow, is everything okay? And I'm finally like knocking on the door, like, is my daughter okay? And she comes out crying. She's like, gosh, he just reprimanded me and told me that, I'm not living a pure life because I got this earring, yada, yada. And he kept on reprimanding her and telling them what a bad parent I was. And that wasn't enough. After we left, he came to our home and he was there for 3 hours until I finally told my husband to throw him out of our house. Like, to sit there and go on and on about what kind of parents we are. Like, you are really crossing a boundary now. Like, we are her parents. We have allowed her this decision. And now for you to come in and tell us what kind of parents we are and make our daughter feel bad about this decision that is not even that big of a deal. But it's
now this happened to you kind of in the middle of your faith walk with Mormonism, or towards the end or the beginning?
Kind of in the middle. So my daughter at that time, I think, was like 12, and we left when she was about 13. So maybe
okay, so towards the end.
I think she was 10. So we left when she was 15.
Oh no, okay, yeah, more in the middle. Yeah, because you're making my skin crawl. I mean, the space between a man and a woman in a marriage is one that no man nor woman on this earth should be in between. And pretty daggum close is the space between a man and a son or daughter and a mom or a son and daughter. Like, those are spaces that you just don't interject in like that. I mean, you're giving me a creepy feeling, honestly, that somebody's going to do that.
Yeah, there were many, many episodes of things like that happened that, and when you're vulnerable, you're walking the walk with them in this cult-like situation. You're vulnerable. You aren't thinking clearly. And another example is that I went to the temple by myself prior to my husband, because my husband did not want to go to the temple. It wasn't something he wanted to do, but because you're really highly encouraged in a pressure way to go to the temple, you're not going to get to live with the Lord. That's just the bottom line. If you don't go to the temple and go to the highest kingdom, you don't get to live with Jesus. Well, I wanted to live with Jesus. And so I wanted to go to the temple. So in the temple, you are not even allowed to see the underwear before you even wear them. So, okay, I'm sorry if this gets creepy, but when you go into the temple, I wasn't allowed to see my underwear prior to being able to put them on. And when I was in there, I have a matron, a female matron. This is my very first time through the temple, mind you. My husband's outside because he can't come in because he doesn't have a recommend. So I get the recommend because I'm better, right? And I'm using that with a sarcastic. I know
the audience doesn't see the big air quotes.
Exactly. So sarcasm is in, I am not better, but that is what I'm being led to believe because I get my recommend. And so I go in there, and when I go in with the matron, I'm in a private room and I'm naked with a sheath on top of me, only just a sheath. And the matron puts my underwear on for me as if I'm a little child. And so it's just really bizarre. They they don't touch your private parts, but they do touch and say, your eyes, you're this, all the symbolism, but it is too far. It's too far. It's crossing the boundaries way too far. And then when you are finally dressed in your priestly garments with you have your long johns on, then you have your dress on, and then you have your Adam's apron on, which we take those off when we come to know Jesus, right? Because there is no shame. The fig leaves were caused. So there's so much symbolism, and it goes
Right.
my book. But you have veiled faces, you have all these kind of things, and there's true order of prayer, an actual way that you have to put your elbow on someone's shoulder. There's just so many routines and things like that. So I've gone through all this stuff now, making the promise to kill myself if I reveal any information to any outsider, which would include my husband.
Say that again.
You make a commitment, a covenant that like this, that if you reveal any information that happened in the temple, that you would take your life. That's you don't reveal any information. So you do this.
I tell you, I'm down with the sacrament of confession. I'm all about keeping the Sabbath holy or things like that. I mean, first communion, down with, confession. Did I say that? But I don't think I'm down with a holy sacrament of dressing me at the death threat of telling anybody what happened. How do you feel about that one, man?
Yeah, it's definitely bizarre.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
So now I go out to my sweet husband, who I obviously love, and he's outside in the parking lot waiting for me for like close to 3 hours. And meanwhile, thinking like, I'm not good enough. I'm not going in there. She's going to, I can't imagine all the things that were running through his head. I only found out later as he left the church. So, all those things that are going through. And now his wife, who was wearing cuter undergarments, is now wearing long johns. And in my book, there's a chapter called "What Happened to My Sexy Wife," because I say, if you're going to put garments on, put them on the children. When they get married, you should be giving them Victoria's Secret clothing. So
yeah, let's get into a little bit more on. Let's try to get in for about 5 minutes or so on what is a cult, if we can get that quickly, to kind of get right to your question, Craig, and what I'm sure we're all wondering about. And then let's take a break and come back and hit some things. But, formal definition, I thought this was actually, a pretty good run through on, well, maybe I'll just cut to the chase. The third one that I like the most, because there's different definitions and different things that people put out there. But I thought this was a good one. A cult is a system of religious beliefs and rituals that is regarded as unorthodox or spurious, with a great devotion to a person, a specific idea, or a specific thing. So a cult is a religious group which differs significantly from the churches that are considered as the normative expressions of a religion or a culture. But that is really kind of broad. Like, I find it, Lavon, hard to really get narrowed down on the 1 and 2 and 3 and 5 simple symptoms or characteristics that make a group a cult. How do you experience that?
Well, I'll help you make it very, very simple. I think if I had to give one sentence that I would just say one sentence, I've got several things here, but one sentence that I would give you is that it strips the individual of their identity and causes conformity instead of individuality. And
Make a note of that, Mr. Neil Robinson. Can you say that again?
Well, I would say that it strips the individual of their identity and causes conformity instead of individuality. And I believe that God created each individual so special, with unique passions, unique purposes, unique things, their draws in the life, the things they want to do. He's placed those things on your heart. And so if you have somebody coming in and causing conformity, now you're no longer allowed to express your individuality. And that to me is a cult. And they did that in the book in Daniel. They took away the clothing that he wore. They gave him a new name, which I was given a new name, by the way, too, in the temple. They gave him a new name. They gave him the foods that he was supposed to eat, the religion he was supposed to do, who he was supposed to worship. So they did these things to Daniel, and that was very much a cult. They tried to strip him of his identity. Praise God that he had a strong relationship with the Lord to keep his identity.
I think that's what people get. I think I'm going to use the word confused about, right? Because I kind of grew up in the Catholic faith tradition. I like to say I'm a Reformed Catholic. I follow Christian beliefs now and traditions, but like you're taught with more traditional practices. You don't eat fish on Friday during Lent. That's just like a rule. There's all these symbolisms in the Catholic faith tradition that I'm kind of familiar with as an adult. I've kind of gone back and tried to understand why they put like, chicken bones or candles on my neck during one of the rituals. And that was in the patron saint of something for choking. And they were blessing you as a child, with candles on your neck. I mean, what I'm trying to say is the traditional practices that are often in faith traditions are kind of weird. They're kind of confusing. And the laying out the difference between, why I've got to breathe in incense smoke while this guy is walking down an aisle in crazy weird robes, mommy, says the, 7-year-old. There's a lot of confusion and overlap with traditional practices in a rich and steeped history of a faith tradition versus what you just said.
Right. Because you can still do tradition without conforming. And so when you're causing that conformity, that's where I think it really does cross the line.
Conformity, right. Yeah. Yeah. I like to say one of the things I think about is, small closed groups or even large ones. But the conformity is what you're talking about with what I've always kind of been worried about when somebody is like closed, like do not talk to the people outside of our congregation, right? Do not let somebody know what we do. Do not, we're so concaved into a small space that is also very much at the same time controlling you.
Right.
But I'm telling you, people that are in it, like literally in what I call religiously traumatic circumstances, just don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like, as I'm sitting here thinking, it just sounds like a fine line. And maybe that definition of conformity is maybe that's the key I'm not getting. But like, even with the Jewish religion before Christ came, the Jews added so much to the law that they couldn't do anything, without sinning, because it was, such a strict thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know local congregations here in my area that may be borderline cultish based on what we're talking about here. And, I've had people tell me that if I wasn't reading the King James, I wasn't reading the true word of God. And, you're going to hell if you're not reading the King James, Craig. And so it just sounds like that maybe the line between spirituality and religion and Christianity is a fine one versus what turns into a cult. And it may be the same with other religions too, but I have more experience with Christianity, obviously.
Right. Well, the scripture that comes to mind, and I don't know the address off the top of my head, but where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And so your true, that's why I say stripping of your true identity, because your true identity is independent. You're able to think for yourself. You're able to be courageous. You're able to make your own decisions, be wise, discerning, everything that the Lord has said about us in our true identity. So your true identity is stripped. And that's what causes the conformity. So if someone is offering a tradition or an opinion, I really like the King James Version. That's an opinion. But to say you cannot read the Passion Translation, you cannot do that, that's causing conformity. And I think that that's where it draws a line.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that we do have a whole lot of freedoms in Jesus.
I do too.
But here in the South, especially, people put a lot of I don't know if regulations is the right, maybe conformity is the right word, but you need to be reading the King James. You need to be wearing your finest clothes when you go to church. You touch a sip of alcohol, man, you're in trouble, and just, you can't listen to that song, And I think there's a lot of that in our area here in the South, Levon. I'm not sure how it is in California, but it's almost like the people in some of these local churches take the freedoms that we have and strip them away completely,
And they do that from their perspective. Like one of the things that gives me concern, Craig, is they are coming up with those types of things, and it's really almost because I'm saying that this church body or this church leader is setting this rule for you, and as a guide for you, because we know what's best. That's the kind of stuff. And we get a lot of that around here. Like I have a lot of clients with religious trauma experiences.
That's so sad. Well, that's like the number one thing with the cult too, is the zealous commitment to a leader. So whether that is a pastor, priest, prophet, whatever, our number one commitment is to Jesus and not a man.
Or a woman.
Or yes.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, you know, any church leader or people are just people, and God is like God. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We can't put too much faith into a man because men are sinful. They can sin. Anybody can sin, but Jesus is the only one that's righteous and the only one that can tell you. And I always say in my coaching practice that you can have 5 different solid Christians tell you 5 different things that's very Christian good advice, and they're all different, but only the one thing from God will be the right thing for you. So that's between you and God. That's why in our coaching practice, we really direct the client to look to the Lord and seek what is the right thing for them.
Yeah. Okay, I think I want to take a break here, and then let's kick back in with boy, you know, how do you deal with this? How do you identify this? How do you get out of it? Those types of things. Is seem like a good time for a break, Mr. Graves?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, awesome. So 5 minutes? Yeah.
So the break is a time for us to talk about our producer, or not our producer, our product support that we get with BetterHelp.com. Craig, help me out. Are they our producer? Are they the product? Are they the mechanism that, what is they?
Who, BetterHelp?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are a online therapy provider. So you go to BetterHelp, you enter in your information, and they hook you up with a therapist who can meet with you online, and you never have to leave the comfort of your own home.
Sponsor. They're the sponsor of the show, right? I just botched this whole break period, but that's okay.
They are a sponsor of the show.
We need to get back to the show. Would you say?
Let's do it.
So do we have a good sense of what a cult is, Craig?
I think we do. I think I do. It's a group of people who have bizarre religious beliefs, who put someone in that cult on a pedestal, and they are expected to conform, and their identity is stripped from them as a result of that. That fair, LaVonne?
Yes.
All right.
You know, they can be big too, listening audience. I mean, you know, I like to think of it as a small contained group, but it's not really fair to say. You mentioned one, Scientology, you know, that's arguably very much a cult, LaVonne, but you know, there's also, you know, kind of more dramatic examples. And so we have some famous examples of some of the things that we're talking about. And I saw them listed here. I only want to read and look at one closer because I didn't know what it was, but you know, Craig, you've probably heard of some of these things, you know, the Branch Davidians, you know, the Manson family. We had Tom Martin on the show, and he actually looked at Charlie Manson. That was a cult. He got people together as the leader and kind of got this group to kind of almost basically worship him. You know, Heaven's Gate is a big example of Warren Jeff's fundamentalist church. Warren Jeff's fundamentalist church. It sounds like a legit church name, but it's really like, this stuff is scary. So in Johnstown, November the 18th, 1978 was the fifth example here. Famous ones in the history of our country, right? Reverend Jim Jones was embraced by the African Americans after his fiery speeches on racial equality in America. From the 50s until the end of the quote unquote the People's Temple in 78, Jones was seen as a beacon of hope, peace across the racial divide, and a leading advocate for socialism. But when Jones moved hundreds of cult members to Johnstown, Guyana, I think, where he and followers believed they could create a quote unquote socialist paradise, concerned family members garnered attention from a California Congressman, Leo Ryan. The congressman sought to investigate whether some cult members were being held against their will, as relatives suggested. When Ryan traveled to Guyana to meet with Jones, he was literally, Craig, he was ambushed on a plane by the Reverend's followers and died after being shot repeatedly in the face and body. Fearing retribution for the congressman's death, Jones led 918 followers to a mass murder suicide known as the Johnstown Massacre. And this is where, on November the 18th, 1978, they died by drinking Kool-Aid. You hear that phrase, right? Oh, don't drink the Kool-Aid, right? Well, they died by drinking cyanide mixed in with Kool-Aid. The Reverend, however, didn't die that way. He's the leader, right? He's the Reverend one. He's a pastor. Well, he ended up, shooting himself in the completing the act of suicide through a gunshot wound. It's just it's scary as crap to me, and loving my own faith tradition with Christianity and my own relationship with Jesus and the Lord, and it is amazing to me how people can, under the name of God, literally, like, take very very helpful and sound doctrines and twist things around, making it about themselves in so many, I'm going to say thousands of organizations across this land. It's crazy to me how that happens. And honestly, it just bothers me,
That's why we should never give up our ability to think and ask questions and really seek. And that you're part of a cult when they do not encourage questions. Jesus said, search me, know me. I want you to look at things about me. But if a cult tells you not to search things out on the internet, that you'd be apostatizing, they tell you not to question anything, that's immediately a red flag to know that you're in the wrong place.
Would be definitely something to note. I agree with you. Yeah. And another thing that occurs to me as another big characteristic, I think, is when there's things hidden from you. It's like, you said definitely
the sequence.
Yeah. You're just a new member, and you don't need to know that. You'll find out when you take this class, and then you take this class, and now you're an esteemed member, and you get a little bit more information, and now you've proven your worth. You're worthy of more information, and it just builds up. It's almost like a crazy Freemason scheme or a secret society kind of thing. Like, that's scary stuff, and people buy it, and they buy into it, and they don't know they're being controlled.
That's what I love so much about God's word, because that's the grounding. If you take God's word, because also with a cult, the leaders oftentimes disobey God's word, and if not always, because look at Joseph Smith. He had 33 wives. The Bible says clearly that you should have one wife, and that's the way the elder should live his life, beyond reproach. And so for Joseph Smith, are you aware that he wrote a commandment to his wife in the Doctrine and Covenants called the New and Everlasting Commandment, which basically means if she did not accept the commandment of polygamy, that she was going to hell? Because obviously she didn't like the fact that her husband had more than one wife. So what did Joseph Smith do? He wrote a new commandment. He added to the book. He added to the Bible. And so he said, if you do not accept this, that you will be going to hell.
Vonne. If anybody in my family or in my circle of friends roots against the Pittsburgh Steelers, they shall therefore be deemed unworthy of North Carolina citizenship. What do you think about that, Mr. Graves?
I'm going to mute his microphone, Levon. Hang on just a second, please.
No, it's dynamic. That's amazing that somebody would be so contentious to think that they're literally going to create a commandment, create a commandment for another human being.
Right.
Let alone your spouse, you said.
Right.
It's remarkable.
Yeah. The Doctrine and Covenants, that's one of their books. They have what's called a quad. They have the Bible. They have the Book of Mormon, which the Bible has been rewritten. There's edits by Joseph Smith in there. So it's the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. And the Doctrine and Covenants is a book of commandments, most of them which are reprimanding different individuals.
Vonne, you make a good point. Look at what the Bible says, and if the cult leader is saying things contrary to that should be a huge red flag, right? I mean, Joe Rogan talks about cults a lot on his show, and he goes further than we are. He's Catholics are in cults, and he goes way down a rabbit hole. But he jokes that all these cult leaders end up choosing their women, whether they're somebody's wife or not.
Yeah.
If the leader wants to sleep with your wife, that should be a huge red flag, right? I mean, come on. You said earlier, I think you said you started doing some research into why people get into these things, and what is the psychology behind it? I mean, why do people just blindly believe these guys? And I see this in local churches too, is people go sit in there and listen to everything the preacher says without going back to the Bible and looking it up. So why is it that people do that? I mean, and how do they get sucked into these cults?
It's a great question. And so going back to our three again, is that you've got the culture Mormons, but let's look at the ones that actually make a choice, people like me. There's always a carrot in anything that we do, a why. There's a carrot for everything. First of all, there's a carrot for why I love Jesus Christ. Now, if Jesus Christ told me that, he was going to burn me in a hell flame of fires and, do bad things to me, I'm obviously not going to follow him. So Jesus Christ offers me great reward. He offers me peace, promises, life with him, beauty, all these good, wonderful things. And those are my rewards that I look to. Now, there are people that are vulnerable, and when cults play into their vulnerabilities, they're easy prey. So for example, I didn't know much about Christianity. I did not know the Bible. I did not know Christianity. And so I came from a dysfunctional family. I see beautiful families. I'm easy prey. I want that. I want good family. I want those kind of things. So I was easy prey. There are other people, and Mormons have the biggest marketing towards families forever. That's their big marketing ploy, is that you can get sealed in the temple and have your family forever. And that's actually contrary to what the Bible says. Is the Bible says that there will be no marriages in heaven, because heaven is so splendid that we can't even imagine. We won't need things like marriage in those, but all those that love Jesus will be there with you. I believe that love binds all things. We don't have to have these different rituals and covenants to make the bindings and create them. Mormons act a lot on, like, if they hear something, they create it. For example, if there's garments in the Bible, they're going to create some physical garments. If they hear the word temple in the Bible, they're going to go create a temple. If they hear the word prophet, they're going to go create a prophet. And so that is just contrary to the way that Jesus works. But in answer to your question, there's always a reward where the vulnerable lie and what they're looking for.
And I was just listening to you like, wow, that's awesome. Groupthink is also a very powerful part of this. Would you agree to that? And can you comment as to that?
I would say that that's true of all of us. Our number one commandment of all of the Bible is to love God and love others. We are all designed that way. We are designed to be in community. That's why isolation and this COVID thing has been very difficult on people, because it isolates you. We are made to be in groups. There is nothing wrong with groups, but like the enemy always does, he takes really good and positive things and he twists them all up. Groups are very positive. It's very positive to go and fellowship and be in church and be a part of group and fellowship. Those are wonderful, good things. It crosses the line when you have a hate to an enemy. We're the better. That's another one thing on here of cults, is that they're elitist. We're better than everybody else, and you're on the other side. And so if you're thinking that way, an elitist way, that is contrary to the Bible, because as Christ's followers, we are evangelists that really are seeking even those that are not like us to come and be with us.
Well, that's what I mean by groupthink. Exactly. Let me back up and say, Craig, you were making me think of that when you said, what are the psychological things that grabs people in? And it's just that. The groupthink, you say elitist. By groupthink, I mean, if I hear you say, hey, Chris, this is an awesome group to be a part of. And I'm like, wow, I respect Craig. I like Craig, and I'm going to go in and meet these people. And then, Neil over here, he says, oh yeah, man, you need to listen to what they say. They'll tell you exactly what's really important stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my great buddies, Craig and Neil, are here. So let me go check this stuff out. It must be really good stuff. And then I get in there and then I bring Susie in and I tell Susie, look, my best buddies have got in here and they've told me this is what you need to know. This is what you need to do. And now Susie's indoctrinated, key word, right? Susie's indoctrinated. Maybe Craig was indoctrinated first, and he gets Neil and he gets me and he gets indoctrinated into, like, you cannot think outside of the box of what we think because we know all the answers. That's groupthink. And it's scary and it's dangerous. And it really does take the individual person kind of away, strips you of that, quite literally, I guess, in your situation with garments. It strips you and pulls you into the quote unquote flock.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in the right ballpark?
Yeah, yes. I agree with the whole group thinking. As long as the definition is, if you lose your thoughts for yourself, if you lose your individuality, then the group no longer becomes a healthy thing.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much that I want to talk about with this. We might have to bring you back in. Okay. I wanted to do, I don't know if I got time to do all of what I wanted to do with this, but if Craig, do you remember when, I'm not going to do it now because I don't want to spend time on it, but do you remember when we did this count the F's thing? We were talking about the denial and addiction.
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember that? Okay. Why don't you say what your experience was with that? Because I think that happens with this.
I don't remember that much of it, but I remember us doing an exercise about counting the F's, and it seemed to be difficult.
And you couldn't see it.
Right.
And that's denial. Like, you cannot see what's literally on the page. When we did that, you couldn't see how many F's were on the page.
Yeah.
And people feel like the denial, like in addiction, it's like, hey, I'm refusing to see this. I don't want to open my eyes. It's fine. No, the point is, when you're indoctrinated and when you're in denial, like, you literally can't see it. It's blinding. It's so insidious. It comes in and takes over your world, and you don't even know it. That's why I want to talk to people in the audience that's out there listening to the show forevermore. Like, this may be you and you don't know it. So LaVonne, in that context, I want to say, like, for you, and I'm really glad you started today out with how you did with your daughter, because boom, like, bam, your daughter woke you up. I mean, the experience I had when you were talking, like, she made you see something. Right. Something happened with that event. So have you thought about, like, what helps people that are really blind? They're not even looking, they're unawares, they don't know. How can they pop a vision and see?
This is a great question. And this is what one of my number one things that I do in our ministry currently with YKI coaching. In fact, we have a discipleship training coming up February 4th, next week, Thursday, just from 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. But I really help people understand. And the reason we train people is really for evangelism, because we want people to come and know Jesus Christ, because he brings freedom, and it's true health and true freedom, unlike a cult. But if you have a loved one, or you have someone that's within the Mormon cult that you would love to help them get out and help them come see, the first thing you need to do is you need to be a safe person. You need to be able to relate to them where they're at. We need to gain rapport. You cannot win anyone without rapport. And so this is why a lot of the things with the street signs and all that kind of stuff, that stuff does not work, because people do not feel safe and they don't gain a rapport with you. They immediately think that you're against them. So we need to gain a rapport. I liken it to Paul when he said, I became like the Greek to win the Greek, like the Jew to win the Jew. And so we do the same thing. We become like the individual in the way that we speak, in the way that we relate to them, all the way down to their learning modality and our communication style, so that we can win them over to true freedom, which we feel is in Jesus Christ. And so that is how we operate and how we work, is by gaining that rapport. So there's so much involved in that with, NLP, with the way that you bless people, your communication style, the way they learn. There's a lot involved in that. But number one is really, like, I would never go evangelize and speak to a Mormon individual in a tank top, because they don't wear those. And so we never sin to win, but we do want to become like them. We would never want to drink a glass of wine and hope that they would listen to us, because they don't drink wine. And so
I guess liquor wouldn't work either.
No, we need to be careful.
No, I hear you saying rapport and connect with them, be on their level. It's awesome, because actually those are some social work counseling tenets that we kind of go to. But what helps them to create a vision, and more so, not from a coaching perspective, but I'm thinking of, like, Jim, Bob, and Sally, and they're down the street in Monroe, North Carolina, and they're good church going folks, but there's some really destructive things going on that they don't see. What can they look for, and how might they open up the vision of that? Is that
I always look for the carrot. What do people want? What does Jim and Sally use there? What do they want? That's a coaching technique, is what do they want? We want to guide them to what they want. Maybe they want peace. And I can almost guarantee any Mormon wants peace. And so it's really helping them to understand peace is available in freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. So it's available over here in freedom. And that's scary for them. So then we begin to paint the word picture and help them to see that faith is involved in God. Do you know, when you walk in a cult and you walk into a conformed religion, there isn't a lot of faith involved, because it's all checking the boxes. Okay, I wear my garments. Okay, I go to the temple. Okay, I do that. There's not a lot of faith involved. And so really we have faith when we trust in Jesus to lead and direct our paths. So really helping.
That's a really good, important point. What I heard you say is, when you're just checking boxes and doing things the right way, that's something to kind of create an awe about. Like, hey, what am I doing? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that sounds really important.
A red flag for you to see. Like, I'm just checking the boxes here. Yeah, that would be a red flag for you to see, because it really takes faith to really walk with the Lord, and takes some quiet listening, which is why I was able to get set free, because it took my coming to the Lord and having faith in him on where he wanted me to be. And so I'm really grateful for Jesus setting me free. I call it free in Christ now. It's awesome. We have people say that, hey, Lavon, you go to that feel good church, and we're like, yes, and we feel great. It's amazing. You got to try it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what you would think about this as well, and I don't know why I did this when I was thinking about the show, but the second time I was thinking about addiction, and I work with alcohol and drug addictions as well as mental health, Lavon. And, one of the things that happens with that denial that we were just talking about, for alcoholism and drug addiction, I would imagine is very similar to religious trauma and cults, is the need for outside of yourself intervention in what it is that you're seeing. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is, if you kind of have any questions about things, go to someone outside of the church mm-hmm. and just ask them. Just ask, because if you go to somebody outside of the church and you ask them about first communion, hey, should I let my kid do this weird tradition where you have bread and pretend it's like Jesus's body, and is that okay for my kid to do? Generally speaking, you're going to be people like, well, yeah, I don't know if I believe all that stuff, but I know people. But if you go to somebody and say, hey, Craig, you think it's okay if like somebody goes and takes all the clothes off my wife and has them in a building for 3 hours and, tells them what garments they can wear for underwear for the rest of their years? I mean, what do you think about that? Right.
Right.
That's to be like, what?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's awesome. I like that.
Outside of yourself and outside of the church feedback. Yeah, I wonder if that's something that can be helpful.
Yeah, they're a little scared of going outside because they think that people are going to counsel them the wrong way. But as a Christian, you can simply ask them questions, because that's your best mode of communication anyways, is to allow the Holy Spirit to convict and reveal to them. So if people, in other words, when I was Mormon, and if Christians had come to me and said, Lavon, what do you think about polygamy? Like, do you think that's right? Do you think that's of the Lord? Like, that would have stirred in my heart, because I always had a little bit of a problem of that. And, if they would have said, well, Lavon, what do you think about garments when the Lord was speaking about garments in the Bible? What do you think about that? Did you realize that that's Jesus, his covering over us, that is the garment of praise, of covering over us? So helping them to understand through questions is a really powerful tool.
Yeah. Okay. Craig, what are you thinking over there, bud? I mean, let me tune into you about how we've done with clarity on this. I mean, it's such a so many directions you can go with this.
Yeah, I think we could have Lavon back again for a second show, but I think it's been good so far. I understand what a cult is, and I would know what to look for if I thought I might be in one, or how to help somebody get out of one maybe. So I think we've been covering some good bases.
Okay. What do you think, Levon, that stuck out in your experiences? I mean, we didn't get back to some of the middle part of, when you look back and you're in a recovery mode, right? Because I want people to understand, I mean, like I have people over the 20 years that I've worked with people with religious trauma. I mean, dadgummit, we just don't have a whole lot of time to talk about the recovery period. And maybe if you're willing, I probably would maybe want to tap you if you'd be willing, because it's such an important topic and not a lot of people I feel like can really talk about it. So I will put that bug in your ear for real, because the recovery of this is just, gosh, I mean,
It's huge.
you almost can have potential of being just stripped from a relationship with God as a choice for recovery, right?
Oh, it happens all the time. People throw the
Right.
baby out with the bathwater all the time. I would love to come back and talk about recovery, because really give you some insight onto how I healed. It was definitely layer by layer. And I think that people around me had to be really patient, because I had a lot of stories to tell. Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe this happened to me. They said this. What do you think about that? I had a ton of questions. So that's definitely some real life healing. And I can definitely see the relatability in what you do with addiction, because addicts are acting out symptomatically, as are cult victims acting out symptomatically to what happened deeper in their life, which is what I revealed to you at the start of our program, to understanding that there is a deeper need. And so when we can understand that, we can remove the symptoms.
Yeah, boy, that's another really big quote. That's, acting out. And it is. I see. I haven't really thought about it. I think I'm going to think about it more with the connections with addiction, because it does, boy, there does seem to be several overlaps, even in our conversation tonight, just freewheeling it a little bit. And in my show prep thought process for this, I mean, there's a lot of overlap there. Have you ever thought of that before?
Me, not really, because we are, my particular family hasn't, but because I work at the mission and I work with a lot of rehab people myself, I understand that there's root causes. It's often basically your foundation has really so much to do with it, whether you're a child of emotional neglect, or you've suffered abuse, or you had some broken area in your life. You're going to be symptomatic in one form or another, for sure.
Okay. Well, Levon, how would you sum us up a little bit with things that you want people to know, things you think that we missed? I mean, you have a passion about this, I can tell. It's something that is obvious reasons why.
Yeah.
How would you sum us up, and what do you want people to know?
Oh gosh, I would sum up for your listeners that take to heart your true identity, who you are apart from anybody else, that you have opinions, that your opinions matter, that God has instilled into you those opinions and those passions in your life, and nobody has a right to remove your identity and cause you to be conformed to their world view. If you conform to their worldview, you're going to miss out on what God truly has for you. And because of that, you're going to feel depleted. You're going to feel lost. You're not going to be able to feel like you matter. That causes a lot of hopelessness and depression. And so I would just say, get your identity back. Find out who you are apart from anything else.
That's awesome. Craig, do you have conclusions or thoughts over there?
Nothing to add. No.
Right. Loved into the light, shining God's light on Mormonism. And I would add that the book, if you convert it to the concept that we've talked about with other faith traditions and cults and such, boy, I know it's been out there since 2012, Levon, but I'm really glad you're doing this work, because I feel like, way beyond just Mormonism, there are so many faith traditions that are unfortunately really hurting people. And I hope that if you're listening to this program, that you can reach out to Levon. We have the contact information on throughatherapisteyes.com. But man, it's such important work that you're doing. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be with both of you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It was great to meet you too, Levon.
So I have a little bit of a tradition on Through a Therapist Size that I've started with a high five. Now, a lot of times I'm able to interview people live. I'm obviously not going to be able to give you a high five, but we're going to do it over the airwaves through the nation. So this is going to reverberate through all the states. So I'm going to count us down from 3, and when we hit 1, we're going to clap, signifying a high five, because this is not easy to do. I mean, coming on and talking about, I don't care how many times you talk about your experience. You remember Stephanie Fast, Craig?
I do.
Dude, she's told her story thousands, at least hundreds of thousands of times. And every time you do, I just want to honor the courage that it takes and the bravery that you display doing that. And I very much appreciate it. So we're going to count down to 3 and clap. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank
No,
you.
I really appreciate it, man. It's been the bomb. It was worth the wait. And I think I really do want to have you on to cover some of the things about recovery and whatnot that we didn't get to.
Healing, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Guys, we'll see you all next week with another long put off show. Very excited about. Finally got him, Mr. Graves. Craig, dude, do you know this guy's name?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Tom Duda.
Oh,
Should be a
fun.
That's right. Yeah, you know him, Lavon. He's going to be on Through a Therapist Size. I'm wicked excited about this, guys. I mean, I don't know what took me so long with the cult thing. I don't know what took me so long with the psychedelic thing. And I'm just wrapping it up, man. Craig, I think I'm wired and fired for 2021 because I'm getting these shows that have been on my head for a long time. And we're going to do it with Tom Duda next week, a CEO that's highly amazing, accomplished. And he's going to talk about the anxiety, the stigmas in mental health from the corporate sector. Sound interesting?
Sounds great.
All right, guys, we're going to see you all next week. Take care.